everyone, my name's Josh from the channel Josh Richens Producer, which you can find here on YouTube, but today I'm at Weiss Advice. Make sure you check out the website weissadvice.com, and I want to tell you about 3 of my favorite distorted guitar tones. In all honesty, there's actually a lot extra as I've got some fun tips along the way, and then I want to have a look at some projects and how you can implement those guitar tones. Now, my last 2 videos on this channel were about distortion and guitar tones, so make sure you go and check those out. But this is going to be much more practical, much more hands-on, so I hope you enjoy the video. I'm going to be using my Jazzmaster for all of the demonstrations that I do, even for some of the heavier demonstrations, as well as I personally think you don't need a particular guitar to play a particular kind of music. And for all of our amp sounds today, I'm going to be using STL Tones Amp Hub, as it's something I personally use a lot in all of my own projects, as we'll see later on. This first preset that I've made is called Crunchy Clean, and I've talked about this sound on the channel before, but basically it's an amplifier, any amplifier, set on the edge of breakup so that when you hit your guitar hard, you get some distortion. But when you play lightly, you get a clean tone. But I can get a little bit more out of my guitar by digging in. So, right off the bat, it's a super duper versatile tone. But my little extra tip for this tone is that it's also a great tone for stacking overdrives in front of. For instance, if I grab something kind of classic, let's go for maybe the Maxon OD808, I can get something that sounds like this. So pretty overdriven. And if we go for another distortion pedal on top of this, maybe say like the Mizar Distortion Plus, turn the output up a little bit, distortion back, maybe distortion up a bit. We've got a pretty good high gain tone, especially if I flick over to my bridge pickup. So this distorted tone is basically 3 distorted tones for the price of 1. We can start off kind of crunchy. Then we can go pretty over the top crunchy. And then just straight up high gain overdrive. I should mention, ignore the Tyrant Ignite Amps pedal over to the left here. It's not doing anything. I think it just loads with the welcome preset, so it's been there the whole time. Moving on, we've got this preset, which I've called a modern take on an old classic, and I want to tell you a little bit of a story about that. And to begin that, I want to tell you about the history of the amplifier we see here. STL Tones has called it the Eddy 5153 White. It is in fact emulating a EVH 5150. Now, the lineage of this amplifier dates back to 1992 with the PV Amplifier Company and Eddie Van Halen, and it really brought on an era of high-gain amplifiers. So in 1992, PV Amplifiers releases the 5150, and it's the signature amplifier for Eddie Van Halen. They then go on to release the PV 5152, and then in 2005, Eddie Van Halen decides he wants to start his own amplifier company, and he wants to sell the 5150. So he buys the 5150 name from PV and starts selling EVH 5150s. PV then went on to make the 6505, and that amplifier is also in STL Tones. Or in Amp Hub, I should say, rather. Now, back when I was a teenager playing hardcore music, everyone had a 6505. They were everywhere for some reason. And before it, pretty much all of them were running tube screamers, and a lot of those people ran it into an orange V30 cabinet. So the reason I've called this a modern take is because I have the 5150 EVH amplifier here, and also some extra stuff that I want to get into with the pedals. But for now, let's hear this tone. And for this tone, I'm going to tune down to drop D. No wonder everybody was using this rig. It sounds really good. Now, that was on my bridge pickup. I could even flick into my middle pickup. Or even my neck pickup. But as I start to go over to my neck pickup, I get a lot of low end buildup. And this is one of the things that I talked about in my previous video, was how low end before the amplifier is going to affect the shape of the distortion. And that's where I want to get into the pedals, and we're going to take this modern thing up another level. So I'm going to turn off the tube screamer, and instead I'm going to turn on this 66. This is a Fortin pedal in real life that is supposed to be the signature pedal for the Meshuggah guitarist. And what it does is it cuts a bunch of low end and then gives you a volume boost before your amplifier. And it sounds like this. Now, I'm not the best guitarist, so bear with some of these power chords, but you can hear that's a pretty messy tone. It's very over the top. I could probably even use the other tone circuit on my guitar, which is a much darker sound using the neck pickup. And now we've got a pretty good sound going into it because we have such a bass heavy dark sound being boosted by such a bright sounding pedal. It's one of my buddy's old riffs. It's not my own, and I'm not the best at playing it, so forgive if it's a little bit sloppy, but he said I could use it for this video. It's one of the only heavy riffs that I really know. But I'll compare this quickly to my bridge pickup using the tube screamer again. And now the neck pickup on the alternate tone circuit using the 66. So while the 66 is a pretty modern pedal, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about. That really messy top end, for me personally, in the heavy metal circles that I kind of operate in, is a hallmark of really heavy music these days. This is kind of a more modern trend where people are going for distortions. Even, say, the neck pickup on this tone circuit, where it's still pretty messy in the top end. A lot of people in the modern heavy metal scene are using sounds like that go over the top and then mixing it in with cleaner amp sounds and cleaner bass tones so that you can still get the articulation. And for me, that's really why this is a modern take on an old classic. This next tone I've called Octave Down tone, and I am going to need one extra piece of hardware, and that is my old Micropog pedal. The only reason I'm using this is because I haven't personally found any good real-time octave down VST sounds that don't feel glitchy or weird, and I personally just love my Micropog pedal. Nothing can replace it. I haven't found a digital version so far. And I'm going to be using it with these settings. So the dry control is going to be all the way up. So we're going to have the dry sound of our guitar exactly as we would normally, but mixed in almost all the way up, just a little bit off, is going to be our sub octave. This can also do an octave up, and we'll see a little bit of that when I look at some mixes later. But for this tone, we're just using the sub octave. This tone is one of my absolute favorites. Let me show you why. So it's a pretty ridiculous over-the-top tone, and it really rewards simplicity. When we have that octave down mixed in, listen to how kind of messy just a simple power chord down on the E string sounds. But if we play our open E string on its own, sounds really good. So it really rewards simplicity. You can just riff away on the E string for days and be content. And as you might have heard before, some of those power chords up higher start to sound really chunky. So to break down this tone, I did use the Raw, which is a rat distortion pedal. I played around with this fuzz, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it, so just sticking with the Raw. And I ran that into the Origin Dual Black 50. It's got a nice crunchy, kind of slower distortion to it. The speed of distortion being, slow and fast is something I also talked about in previous videos, and I think it's maybe something I made up, but generally you can hear those grains sound kind of longer and more drawn out and not as fizzy. And a big part of that is also the octave pedal, because we've got so much low end going into this sound. And for the cab, we're using the orange cab with G12s this time. Now, the extra little tip that I have for this tone is actually how you get one of my favorite distorted tones. And the way you do it is by turning the cabinet off. This isn't something you can do with a real tube amplifier unless you've got a load box or something like that, as you will damage the head, but inside a VST, it's all good. Now, for the sake of your ears, I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. With this octave down tone and no cabinet, it sounds like this. I know, it's bad. I'm not quite done. What you want to do with this tone is you want to grab your gain and you just want to pull it back to the point where you're just starting to get a bit of that crackly fizz in the top end. You hear how there's kind of a threshold there? Maybe even just a touch more. So it's a pretty crazy over-the-top tone, and I wouldn't use it on its own. But when you mix this in with other tones, it sounds really, really good. And I'll show you that in this mix. Now, I'm in the project for a song called Love Language by my friend Harry Carmen. And if you don't know Harry, he's been featured on this channel before as Matt mixed his song Buzz. For Love Language, though, it's not complete or out yet, but I do want to show you this section. So have a listen. Now, you might be able to pick out what I want to show you, and it's that guitar tone that I just talked about. So if I solo it out, it sounds like this. So for this particular sound, we've got an octave up going on, and I don't think there is any octave down mixed in, but we are doing the trick that I said before with the no cabinet. You can see down the bottom there, it's turned off. For the amplifier, we're using the Phoenix Brown combo, no stomp boxes in the front of it, and this is another little trick that I personally love for any guitar tone. I'm going to play this tone to you again, but I'm going to turn off this Giano doubler, and I'll show you how that sounds. And now with the doubler. This doubler sounds great on any distorted guitar tone, and honestly, even vocals and acoustic guitars, pretty much anything you can throw it on. A lot of the times I'll pull up STL Amp Hub and I'll turn off everything except for the effects section just so I can use this doubler. I think it's also worth mentioning at this point that this isn't sponsored by STL. I just love their product. I use it all the time. I mean, if they wanted to sponsor me, obviously I wouldn't say no or anything, but moving on. There's a chainsaw EQ here that I probably played around with but didn't use, so we'll ignore that for now. I want to show you how this tone layers up with everything. So we've also got the octave down tone that I talked about before. Let me show you that as well. And to quickly run you down what's going on there. No pedals, but we do obviously have the Pog doing an octave down. Going into the Brit Plexi, we've got the Eagle 412 cabinet with G12s in it. Once again, on its own, it sounds like this. But if I mix in this dirty thin guitar, which is the octave up one without a cabinet that I just showed you, you can really hear how much that thin guitar is adding. And if I add these two synthesizers in as well, these are kind of the rest of the stack except for the bass. And once again, in the mix with everything. So as you can see, mixing sounds together, even some not conventional sounds like this really over the top, no cabinet sound, can be really fun. And that's something I also want to show in this next project. So now I'm in the project folder for the upcoming EP by Postum, either upcoming or just released, one or the other. Either way, you should go and check them out. Now, I also want to make it clear that I just tracked the drums for this EP. I didn't track guitars or bass, but to track the drums, I was given some clean DIs so I could get guitar tones, and they've kindly told me that I could use those guitar tones for this video. So, like I said, I'll put their socials at the bottom of the page. Go and check them out. I'm super excited to hear how it comes out. It's been handed on to the band, who then went and recorded guitars after this, and everyone in the band really knows their stuff when it comes to heavy guitar tones like this. And then it's being sent off to another guy to mix it, so I'm super excited to see what comes out of it. Now, I also had a lot of fun playing around with these guitar tones and just talking to Daniel the guitarist about heavy guitar tones and seeing what we could get. So let me play a little bit of it down for you. So, pretty extreme and over the top. If I just solo those guitars out for you, they sound like this. And like I said, I want to talk about mixing guitar tones. As you can see, I have 4 guitar tones stacked up here. There's 2 for each side, 2 on the left side, 2 on the right side. Pretty typical for heavy guitars. And the first tone that I have, the left and right pair, sound like this. So I'll give you a rundown of just one side, as that will give you an idea for what's going on both sides. For this sound here, we've got a HM2 tone. We've played around with a lot of different things as far as the pedals go. I'll touch on that. And as you can see here, we have the 6505, like I mentioned before, just a really good high gain amplifier. And that's another fun tip for you. If you're looking to go get another awesome high gain tone, the HM2 sound is a really good one. And that's just a normal high gain tone with a HM2 in front of it. I've kind of dialed it back, but if you really want to indulge in the HM2 tone, the real trick is to turn all of the knobs on the pedal all the way up. And as far as the cabinet goes, we have the Eagle cabinet with G12s that I use a whole bunch. We also do have a little bit of this rectifier cabinet mixed in, as I think this has just come from the preset EU Fire. Now, that stereo pair sounds like this. And I think you'll remember earlier on in the video, I talked about that really messy top end being a hallmark of modern, really heavy productions. Well, you can hear what I'm talking about there. That's definitely what I've gone for with this. And so to complement that, what we've got in the middle is this much less gainy, much more articulate tone that sounds like this. So you can see that there's a lot more kind of note when he's hitting those notes that aren't palm muted, and the palm mutes have a lot more definition to when the chug is actually happening. So when we mix all of those together, we get this. To show you what's really going on with the articulation, I'm going to start with just the HM2 tone, and then I'll solo out the crunchier tone in the middle. So by solo out, I meant added into the sound. As you heard there, you get a lot of clarity out of that, which is really useful, especially in the mix. For instance, I can show you in the mix. We'll come over to this section here where there's a few more chords that are held out, and we want to be able to hear what's going on in those chords. I'll show you what it all sounds like together. And now I'm going to mute the crunchier, more articulate tone and just play it with the HM2 tone, and I'll bring in the crunchier tone as I'm playing. So when Daniel's holding those notes in this riff, you can hear the note a lot more clearly when that crunchier tone is in. I'll give you a rundown of one of those as well. Once again, the 5150. At the start, we don't have any pedals. It's just the 5150 going into that same Eagle G12 cabinet, which is the Engel G12 cabinet. And once again, those guitars on their own sound like this. Not super interesting on their own, but once you bring in everything, you get this really cool picture. And I think that kind of illustrates what I wanted to talk about when it comes to layering distorted guitar tones, and hopefully it gives you a few cool tricks that you can use in your own projects as well, whether they're heavy projects or not. These are cool things to get away with whenever you want to use some distorted guitar tones. So I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you found this useful. This is really fun for me. Although I'm not the best guitarist in the world, I really love guitar gear and guitar amplifiers and stuff like that. So if you like this and you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments. And make sure you head over to wiseadvice.com, check out some of the courses that Matt has there. He even has memberships, so if you want all of the courses at once and access to some of the perks of being a member, make sure you check out that as well. And remember what we say here at Wise Advice, we are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I'll catch you next time.